I've recently been reading Echo's Semiotics, the Philosophy of Language. It is a book worth reading. The ontology of language, that should be plural, that Quine wrote about is well supported by Echo's description of language semiotics. Language is, of course, represented by signs. Signs have meaning. Meaning tends to derive from referral to objects, yet not necessarily. In fact, the more abstract removal from direct experience life becomes, the more it is regarded as reflecting intelligence. Today, news broke the story of an alleged Neanderthal art in opposition to the idea that Neanderthals had that level of abstract reason. The conceit of humans is that art is an exclusive human activity. One doesn't expect that from chimps, for example, though listening to the news media I might take exception to that. Metaphor is an abstract art, as is metaphysics. Echo helpfully recounts the history from Aristotle through the Middle Ages to at least the 1980s of language theory. One finds the classification of ideas, words, objects, and so forth by Aristotle, later Porphyry in the genus, species, and etc. as a hierarchialization of descriptions, meanings, and relationships that was important to philosophers over the ages. Yet we find that the hierarchialization of signs and meanings breaks down. Echo describes the failure of dictionary definitions to have a valid hierarchical structure, words, and meaning as a result of the need to explain each word used in the term with other words that again need to be explained by other words. Eventually, an encyclopedization of descriptions supplants the validity of dictionaries. W.V.O. Quine wrote a book named Ontological Relativity, and at least so far as I've read in Echo's book, that is the consequence of language and signs that are fundamentally no more than descriptions and descriptive fields. The vast nonlinear web of word meanings allows formation of local lexicons or ontology that are valid only so far as they go as they are used. That is a reason why logical formulations can be contradictory and yet valid potentially. The meanings of the terms in propositional usage may differ, making formulations such as if P then Q true sometimes and false in others, given the same values for P and Q. It's the context that determines the values. If language in semiotics is a network of differentia, describing God with differentia implicitly is a difficult effort, unless it is a real individual such as Jesus Christ. That is simply the nature of things. One wants to place God on a Porphyrian tree chart as a substance or quality, mortal or not mortal, yet the nature of language is such that even with Kripke's rigid designators, temporality would tend to erase the meaning with the drift of time from the baptismal bestowing of meaning to each word. It is notable that Adam appeared after the creation of the world to name every animal rather than before. Mankind needed to develop abstract reason a little before naming the things it encountered with more than gurs and yikes. It isn't likely that any human logic has the linear rigid designators needed to describe God in order to refute the concept of the existence of God logically. One can appeal to ignorance and say that that which cannot be expressed cannot exist. It works well implicitly for the worm and even the chimp, yet of course that thought never occurs to either. The Neoplatonists gave quite a bit of thought to the ideas about hierarchical classification of material things and immaterial ideas arising from the one. The one is the inexpressible, immaterial creator or emanator of all things, what Christians such as myself like to call God. The nature of words in the modern context refers to metaphysical or transphysical ideas problematic, yet also more possible because of the appearance of cosmological theories that support such logical speculations. The one is logically possible for individuals to consider, even if inaccurately. I've given some thought in recent times to the question of how monism can transform into pluralism logically regarding cosmology. The question of the one God issuing a universe of plural forms is ponderous regarding logical method for differentiation. One knows that Leibniz inferred that the quantum world is constructed from one-dimensional sections called monads, with some being two-dimensional, and that these sections of spirit comprise the matter of which everything else arises. Yet we might wonder where the monads came from. At least I did. If one imagines a circle as the one existing in the beginning as an example of monism, it is easy to regard the nothingness inside and outside the circle as important. The circle might have been a dot to start with, yet, of course, it's only a visualizable paradigm for comprehending a little of the character of monism creating pluralism. With the existence of the circle of any relative size, it is possible to imagine the omniscient one emanating a sinusoidal wave around the circle of a select size, and from that, a succession of smaller waves, perhaps graduating toward the center of the circle, with important nothingness or spacing, allowing the formation of structure. Of course, these structures might be compared with quantum structures of things, membranes, strings, quarks, larger particle waves, yet it is the geometry of the generation of the continuous yet distinct structures within the circle that is of most interest. One can visualize that the monism continues concurrent with the creation of pluralism. One can imagine that the order of appearance of the structures might be construed as time, with the spacing or intervals in order of appearance and distance, relative scale and form of the structures comprising space, and the scale of space. The structures, instead of being in just 2 dimensions, can occur in 3, 4, or n dimensions as the purpose of the one finds it useful. In a 4-dimensional hyperspherical universe with structures arising within and without it is easy to imagine that even more complex dimensional regions could travel in different directions of space and time toward the one circle of origin or outward toward the center of the circle, while the original line might itself not be absolutely stationary and may even transition into being part of the structure for itself. The philosophical problem of how one substance or one spirit might generate pluralism along with nothingness in the variety of different forms may be approached from another slightly different way. The initial spirit might be able to thin out or decrease its substance somewhat and create a comparative being in nothingness, even though nothingness does not actually exist. Then, the variety of structures of pluralism created with quantum relationships of scale of energy or mass could proceed. There's obviously no definite limit to the number of structural universes that the pluralism could issue, as the scalar field characteristics are contingent upon the will of the spirit. Semiotics in the philosophy of language gives an illustration of the classification of words and meanings with a hierarchical branch structure with hyponyms and greater hyponyms arising into the top, wherein one might find general universal concepts. That obviously suggested to me that the idea that the universal one might in a comparable way issue a variety of forms through structures of pluralism could be a good example for a paradigm of that. Within the pluralistic structure, not only might forms arise with definite complex structures generated by the one that yet remain within monism, it might be possible for the one to design the emergence of forms or intelligence from the context of the structures. Perhaps intelligence of sentient beings arising from matter might be an example. Photons, too, are, I believe, emergent quanta, have an electromagnetic field.